to our Parsha class, to those who are here live in the room, and to those who are watching through the modern inventions, which has a direct connection to this week's Parsha, and I'll mention it a little bit later. But let's start at the beginning. The very first verse reads, Eila told us Noach. These are the children of Noah. Noach ish tzaddik. Noah was a righteous man. Tamim. He was a perfectly righteous man. Haya. He was b'darosav in his generations. As well, Likim his halach Noach. Noach walked in God's direction. So here, there are several points that have to be made. It starts off by saying these are the children of Noach, and it doesn't mention his children until the next verse, where it says, and Noach fathered 3 sons, Shem, Cham, and Yafes. So Rashi gives 2 interpretations. He says, first of all, you should know that what are the children of a righteous person? The children of a righteous person are his good deeds. So these are the children of Noach. What are his children? He was a righteous man. Those are the things that endure forever. That's the second interpretation of Rashi. The first one is a little simpler, that when you mention the name of a good person, of a righteous person, you should bless him. You should praise him. Zecher tzaddik, there's a verse, it says, Zecher tzaddik livracha, the memory of a righteous person is for blessing. So when the Torah mentions Noach, it tells you he's a righteous man. So the Rebbe once asked, when the Torah talks about Abraham, it doesn't praise him after it mentions his name. So the Rebbe answered, the entire book of Genesis is his praise. Noach doesn't get that much praise in the text. So you have to mention it. You have to say he was a righteous man. But Abraham, you don't have to even mention it. You can just see in his life's work that he was a righteous person. Now it says here, he was a perfectly righteous person. If you fast forward to the verse where God speaks to Noach in chapter 7, verse 1, God says to Noach, come into the teva, to the ark, because I saw that you are a tzaddik. What does the word tzaddik mean? Righteous. It doesn't say perfectly righteous. Here it says tzaddik tamim, a perfectly righteous person. But when God speaks directly to Noach, he leaves out the word perfect. So Rashi says, from here we learn that when you praise a person to his face, you only say some of his praise. But when you talk about a person not in his face, you should say it all. That's the simple understanding of that is that when you're talking to a person directly, you don't want the person to become arrogant and, well, I'm such a great person, I can retire now, I don't have to do anything more. I'm perfect. But when you're talking about the person to another, why should you skimp on his praise? Why should you deny other people the knowledge that this person is so special? Human nature is usually the other way around. Human nature is, when you talk directly to a person, you try to flatter him. Oh, you're the greatest. You're the most wonderful. When you talk about him to someone else, nothing to write home about. He's a nice guy, but, not perfect. And here, we do just the opposite. When to a person in his face, don't flatter him. You could say his praise, but not all of his praise. When you're talking about him, then you say all his praise. But there's also a deeper dimension to that. And I'll just illustrate that with a story in the Talmud. One of the greatest sages, Rabbi Tarfon, I believe it was seriously ill. And his mother came to the house of study, where all his colleagues were. They were all very holy people. And she begs them to pray for her son. And she said, I want you to know who my son is. My son is the most wonderful child. You know how much he respects me? And she tells a story that once she was walking outside and her sandals, the buckle snapped, ripped, and she couldn't walk with her sandals. So my son, Rabbi Tarfon, he didn't want me to walk barefoot on the ground, so he put his hands on the ground so I should walk on his hands until I got into the house. Which is, most children don't do that for their parents. So you know what they told her? He hasn't even done a half of what a child is obligated to do for his parent. So the commentaries ask, isn't that horrible? I mean, here a poor mother is crying about her child's life, and instead of saying, oh, your child is so wonderful, may God give him a speedy recovery, you say, he didn't do anything so special. What he did was not even half of what he should have been doing. So what the answer given to that is that when a person is perfect, that means they have nothing left to do. Because if you're perfect, there's nothing more to do. So God says, oh, you're perfect? Come with me. You're finished. Now you can retire. I'll take you into paradise. But when a person is incomplete, imperfect, he still has a lot more to do. That's what they were telling her. Don't say your son is perfect because maybe it's time for him to go. He still has so much more he can do. And that's the meaning. When you're talking in a person's presence, when a person is still alive, don't say everything about this person because it's not everything. There's much more the person can do. When you're talking not in the person's presence, that means when the person has already left this world and is no longer able to accomplish, then you could appreciate all of what they have accomplished. Okay, then it says God speaks to Noah and tells him to build an ark, go into the ark. But before that, one other point, that it says he was perfectly righteous in his generation. What is that word, in his generation? That's a qualifier. So Rashi says there are two interpretations. Some use it as a praise for Noah, and some say no, it's a criticism of Noah. Of Noah.
He was better than those around him.
That's right. That the first interpretation is that look what kind of a special person this is. He lived in such a horrible generation. Everyone was so corrupt. And yet he was righteous. Imagine how righteous he would have been had he lived in a positive environment. He would have been incredibly righteous. Some say no, just the opposite. He was righteous, relatively speaking. Yeah, if you compare him to everyone else was so evil, so you could say he was righteous. But if he'd be in the generation of Abraham, he would have been a non-entity.
But on the other hand, he really convinced God to not to completely eradicate the world.
He didn't convince God. God told him, I'm going to save you. Because he was deserving to be saved, but he wasn't really that holy as compared to Abraham.
To Abraham.
Right. So there's two ways of looking at it. When you see someone is good in a bad environment, you could say, well, imagine how he'd be if he'd be in a good environment. On the other hand, you could say, no, if he'd be a good environment, people would look at him and say he's a nobody compared to the greatness of Abraham. So the Rebbe asked, why would we want to interpret Noach's righteousness in a negative way? Why would you want to minimize his greatness? The Torah is trying to tell you how good he was, and we're trying to find ways of minimizing it. That doesn't seem to be the right approach. So the Rebbe spoke about it many occasions. I'll just share one point. Not a simple explanation, but based on the Baal Shem Tov. God tells Noah, Bo el hateva, come into the ark. That's later on, after he tells him to build the ark, he tells him to come into the ark. That's in the beginning of chapter 7. God says to Noah, come into the ark, you and your whole family. Now, what does the word ark in Hebrew? Teva.
Word.
Teva. Teva means a
word.
Teva means a word, right? A word. Why is an ark called a word? Because what is a word? A word is a structure that contains a concept. It houses a concept. You say the word world. World is a concept. Whatever word you use, it represents a concept. So a teva, which means word, also means, which means an ark, also means a word. Because an ark is a large structure that contains whatever it is that you put in the ark, and the same thing with a word. So the Baal Shem Tov said that whenever there's a flood in the world, whenever there's destructive influences in the world, which is almost always, until Mashiach comes, how do we protect ourselves? How do we secure ourselves? Bo elateva, we go into the word. What is the word? So Baal Shem Tov says two types of words that we have in Judaism. We have Torah and prayer. They both use words. The difference is Torah are God's words, prayer are our words that we use to communicate with God. But both Torah and Tefillah are contained within the word Teva. So what is our way of saving ourselves from the flood that threatens us? To go into the word, not just to learn Torah, not just to say the words of prayer, but to go into those words. Let the words envelop us. It becomes our structure, our house. Now, there are two types of people who might take exception to this. One person is a very high-level individual, someone who's very spiritual, someone who is very moral, and he could say, you know what? That's not for me. I'm above that. I don't have to save myself. I'm not vulnerable. I'm impervious to the influences of the outside world. There are people who feel that they're good people and they could venture into the world without any protection. So that's what the sages say, let's interpret Noach in a positive way. Even if you're on a holy level, you still have to go into the ark. You still have to go into the words of Torah and Tefillah.
Isn't it a little arrogant, though, to say
yes,
that
people who are smart people, spiritual people, could become arrogant. That is true, because they're on a high level, they're on a perch, and they think they're higher up than the normal person, and they no longer have to avail themselves of this protection. So the Torah says, yeah, you want to look at yourself in a praiseworthy way, you still have to go into the ark. Then there's the other category, the lowly person, the person who is messed up with his life, and he could say, you know what, it's not going to help. I'm a lost cause. Going into the ark, going into the words will not save me because I am lost. I'm finished. I'm not salvageable. And that's what we say. Even if you interpret Noach in a negative way, even if you feel that he was on a lower level, you still have the ability to be saved by going into the Word. You're never too high for it, and you're never too low for it. That's the lesson by interpreting Noach in two different ways. That's one of the approaches that the Rebbe used. Okay, so the earth is corrupted in verse 11, and the whole world is filled with chamas. Chamas is violence. Rashi says it means theft in particular. That they had all vices. They did everything wrong. They were immoral in many ways, but the theft was the finishing touch. That was the final straw that broke the camel's back. The theft, the dishonesty.
But Hashem and Hashem's consciousness, even before Adam knew that this was going to occur with man.
Sure.
So wouldn't it be that Hashem felt that it was important for it to happen, and maybe man learned something.
Yes, we learned. That's the whole point, that God let the world go downhill, even though the angels, when he wanted to create man, told them, don't do it, they're going to mess up, you're going to regret it. And when the world came to a point where it had to be destroyed, the angel said to God, we told you so, you didn't listen to us. Well, God, of course,
an arrogant angel.
God, of course, knows exactly what he's doing, and this was a preliminary stage to teach the world what could happen when you are not connected to God's commandments. But
Isn't that, in a sense, what the order of evolution is about too? You know, in the sense that the Seder Histoshalut, is that how you pronounce it?
the what?
The Seder Histoshalut, the order of evolution.
Seder Hishtalshalut.
Hishtalshalut, yeah.
In that, the world's become increasingly
Low.
more concrete, starting from abstract, going to more concrete. And in that process, it gives man an ability to go up.
To reverse that process.
Reverse
Yes,
it rather than just to make a jump that's
Right.
too great a leap.
Absolutely.
Isn't this similar?
Right. Well, getting back to the world was corrupt in every way, yet Rashi says the decree was sealed because of theft.
Theft of what? By
What?
just pervasive theft?
Pervasive theft. Now, there's a medrash that says that people would steal less than the value of a pruta. A pruta is the smallest denomination, like a penny today. A penny today is probably not even worth a pruta, but let's say a dime or a quarter. So they always made sure to steal less than that. I was visiting a prison years ago, and there was a guy there who was in for a few years. Why? Because he was able to hack into idle accounts in the banks. Rich people who had accounts that haven't touched those accounts in years, so they probably forgot about those accounts, and he hacked into them and took the interest only from those accounts, and he made over $1 million. And when he was caught, the people were grateful to him. They didn't want to press charges. They said, because we forgot about these accounts. Now that we know about them, we're better off. But they put him in jail for 2 years, and they let him work on the computers, and he hacked the computers in Albany. So, then they wanted to let him out early on the condition that he never touches a computer again, and he refused. I guess that's it. That was his life. But what was his rationale? I'm not doing anything wrong, anything immoral. I'm only stealing the interest. I'm leaving the principal, and these people don't even know about the rationalization of dishonesty. In a way, is worse than being overtly dishonest and corrupt. Because when a person is corrupt, they know what they're doing is a crime, but they're saying, I want to make the money, I'm doing it. But when you try to do it in a way that you convince yourself that it's kosher, that's a much more insidious form of evil. And that's so pervasive, you can't stop them. I'm doing nothing wrong. What did I do? I stole. Someone goes into Walmart, and the owners of Walmart have what to put on their table for Shabbos if they kept Shabbos. So a guy goes in there and he steals something worth $3, and you're a poor person. You say to yourself, is that going to cause anyone any harm? Is there anyone who's going to feel that they are deprived because I stole something worth $3? So you justify it. That's worse than the person who goes in there and steals $1 million from a bank.
But that happens, that's ubiquitous. And, just look at the United Nations.
That's the downfall of a society.
Everything.
That's the downfall of a society. That's what destroyed society. If there would have just been a lot of bank robbers, it would be bad, but it wouldn't have brought decay and destruction. When every person feels, I can do a little cheating here, a little cheating there, it's not going to hurt anyone. So I once heard a philosophical argument against that rationalization, that anything that if everyone would do would cause harm, then if anyone does it, it's wrong. That's the argument. If everyone stole $3 from Walmart, Walmart would be out of business. Okay? But that's still not the right approach. Even if I'm the only person in the world who steals the $3 from Walmart and no one else would do it, it's just as wrong as if everyone else would do it. And that's something that's unique to Torah, that there's something that's inherently and intrinsically right and inherently and intrinsically wrong. And when you blur those distinctions, you bring destruction to the world. And it's a point that we could talk about much more, but I want to go on to the next thing. So he makes this ark. The ark is 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. And that's in verse 15. I just saw today, the contemporary commentary brings, I think he quotes this in the name of another book called Arvei Nachal. It says if you take the three amounts, the 300, 50, and 30, in Hebrew, the numbers in Hebrew are letters. So 30 is a lamed, 300 is a shin, 50 is a nun that spells lashon, the tongue, speech. That the dimensions of the ark corresponded to the concept of speech. That the people corrupted their speech. And the Kabbalists say that sexual perversion and immorality parallels corruption of speech. When you have a society where people's speech is corrupted, it's a sign that there is a much deeper corruption as well. And that's what happened over here. There was this immorality that went from the sexual forms of immorality to the verbal forms of immorality. There are three different levels that had to be made. Why three levels? Where are the three levels mentioned?
16. The stories.
Verse 16. Three stories.
Lower, second, and third stories.
There was a bottom, second level, and third level. What are the three levels for? So Rashi says the top level was for the people. How many people were in the ark? 8 people. The middle level was for the animals. The bottom level was for the waste. Whole year they were in the ark. Why didn't they just throw it out?
The window.
Because they didn't want to pollute the environment. So they kept it in the bottom level. So one of the Hasidic masters, what? One of the Hasidic masters explains, since we know that the teva, the ark, is a metaphor for prayer, he says prayer also has 3 levels. The bottom level of prayer is what King David refers to as tefillah la'ani, the prayer of a poor man. What that means, a poor man, not just financially poor, but a person who's spiritually and morally poor, is someone who's in the dumps, someone who reached the bottom, someone whose life is destroyed and cannot pick himself off the ground, and thinks that it's hopeless and there's no chance of him ever redeeming himself. And he cries out to God. God listens to that prayer, and he pulls him out of the dump that he's in. That's the bottom level where all the waste product is. That's when a person is in the waste of society.
Is that like when we're reading in Tanya, where the person is very depressed and knows he's depressed, but he calls out to God, and that's the satisfaction of and repentance, what's expected for the person to be so low in his spirit.
Well, this is someone who is low because they are low.
Right.
They are in the very bottom of whatever levels there are. He reached the bottom. It's like the drug addict who hits rock bottom, or the alcoholic who hits rock bottom, or the person who involves himself in crime, and they just feel, I cannot extricate myself from where I am now. They're in the dumps. They're in the again, the waste of society.
And God hears that person.
And God says, you cry out to me, I hear that prayer. That's the prayer of the poor man. That's prayer from someone who's on the lowest level. Then there's prayer on the middle level. That's King David's prayer. King David talks about the struggles that we have. Talking about the average person who's constantly going through struggles in life.
He was not an average man.
No, but he speaks the language of the average man. He's speaking for us. And this is the person, Tefillah LeDavid, the prayer of King David, the prayer that expresses our emotions and the struggles that we have and the difficulties, dealing with our animal soul. That's the middle level that houses the animal in us. We're trying to tame that animal. We didn't hit bottom. We're still good people. We do good things, but we have a struggle because we have an animal soul. Then you have the tzaddik, the dwelling of only humanity, no animals, no garbage. It's all pure and holy. That's Tefillah LeMoshe. That's the prayer of Moses. Moses didn't have to struggle with his animal soul. Moses was the most perfect tzaddik. He certainly didn't have to cry out from the bottom. He's a rich man's prayer. What's a rich man's prayer? What does a rich man want? More wealth.
Right. Unity with God.
Right. What Moses' wealth was his spirituality, was his closeness to God. What did he want? I want to get still closer. Or, I care for others. I don't need anything. I have everything already. But I want to be president so I can help the rest of society. Oh, I'm sorry, you can't mix politics. I want... And I'm not comparing any candidates to Moses.
But is it a little bit those three levels, like Rasha, Benoni, and Tzaddik?
Yes, yeah. The Rasha who's the bottom level Rasha. Then there's the Benoni who has the struggle. But there could be a Rasha who also has the struggle, didn't hit rock bottom. And there's the person who essentially is not too much into a struggle. He's just focused on higher things. But his prayer is to go even higher, and also for the benefit of others. He's thinking about others. I have everything. I'm only interested in helping others. That's I believe it was Reb Mordechai of Chernobyl who said this explanation of the three levels. I'd like to apply this to Torah as well, because we said before that the Baal Shem Tov said that the Teva, the ark, is prayer, the words of prayer, but also the words of Torah. So in Torah also there are three levels. The lowest level of Torah is the level of Torah that tells us down-to-earth things about how to live our lives. Torah that guides us in the physical world. The middle level of Torah is the blueprint of creation. It's the level of Torah that is really responsible for all of existence. There's nothing in the world that exists that isn't in the Torah. And when we study Torah, you are able to have control over the world in which you live. The lowest level of Torah doesn't control the world. You have to apply it to control your life. But the middle level is the level where the Torah itself controls the world. And if you're on a high enough level, the story is told about Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, who was the author of the Zohar, that the world needed rain, and they came to him, and he just said some words of Torah, and the rain came down. Because when you have that close connection to Torah, you could manipulate nature, because Torah controls nature. Then there's the highest level of Torah. It's God's wisdom, God's delight. It transcends the world. That's the highest level. So Torah also has those three levels. Okay, let's go on. I'm going to cover some more ground. So, Noach builds a teva. How long did it take him to build it? And who built it? Who built it, the ark? Noach alone. He didn't call up a shipyard and say, I need a boat 300 by 50 by 30. He didn't even enlist his own kids in building it. He didn't hire workers. God told him, you build the ark. So how does an old man at the age of 500 approximately, how long does it take for a 500-year-old man to build an ark? It took him 120 years. Why did God make him build an ark for 120 years? If he had hired workers, it would have been in maybe a year or two.
Democratic make work strategy.
Well, he couldn't get a permit. Environmentalists said,
Yeah,
you're gonna
environmental impact study.
right.
That was to allow.
And then the zoning laws.
Time for the world to repent.
Right. So the answer is, as you just said, God wanted him to get people to arouse their curiosity. Why is this old man building a ship? Did something?
Dry land.
Why is he building this ship? And the answer, he would tell them, because God is going to destroy the world. And this was supposed to encourage them to do tshuva, to repent. Did it work? No.
No Baal Teshuvah.
Not one. Not even one person in 120 years of effort changed their ways. Otherwise, they would have been included in the ark. What's going on over here? So there are those who say, and this is based on the Zohar, that Noach was really responsible for the flood. The flood is named after him. May Noach, the waters of Noach. Why? Because he didn't pray for the people of his generation, the way Abraham did, or the way Moses did.
That's a bad route.
So the Rebbe explains, why was he not effective? But he did work 120 years building an ark, and he's definitely told people what he's doing and why he's doing it. Why was he not effective? So the Rebbe said, because he did it because God told him to do it. There was no empathy. He wasn't doing it because I care for the people. He did it out of, well, God commanded me to do it. Wants me to build an ark? I'll build an ark. 120 years. Very righteous man. But that's not enough to be righteous. You have to care about the people who you are given the responsibility to care for. And that he didn't have. But we shouldn't put Noach down even because of that. Because the world wasn't ready for an Abraham. The world wasn't ready for a Moses. This was an early stage of the world in its development. So even the righteous Noach couldn't develop that empathy that would be needed to change the world.
But if Noah was the most righteous up until that time, and Noah obviously lacked a conceptual idea of what empathy is and what caring for your fellow man is, it sort of says that humankind changed after the flood.
Yes, it did.
That we evolved into something different.
The flood did not only punish people, it also cleansed the world. The flood lasted for 40 days. There's a significance to the number 40. A mikveh, which is a purification pool, has to contain 40 sa'ah, that's a measurement, of water. Why 40? What's the significance of 40? Well, the simple reason is that's the amount of water that a human body displaces. So if you want to immerse yourself in a mikveh, it has to have enough water for the human body to enter into. But why is it just 40? It's a reminder of the 40 days in which this flood destroyed the world. Or you can look at it the other way around. The flood is a reminder of the mikveh. The flood is a purification of the world. It changed the nature of the world. When Noah came out of the ark, it says he saw a new world. The world was not the same world it was before. It had a new potential. So on one hand, the world changed physically. Where do we see the world changing physically? Up until the flood, people were living to the ripe old age of 800, 900. Methuselah lived to the age of 969. Yered, 962. Noah himself lived to the age of 950. Adam, 930. People lived long lives. Right after the flood, you see the people who were born after the flood are living much shorter lives. And it keeps on going downhill until Abraham, who lives only to 175. And then it goes down. Jacob is 147, Joseph is 110, Moses is 120, and it keeps on going down until the average age became 70, 80. That's what King David talks about, which has been, I think, more or less stable throughout history. It's only now that we're seeing it changing because they're getting closer to Mashiach. We're seeing longevity.
Make it dip lower. I think it was only 40.
No, that's an average when you take in consideration all the infant fatalities, all the diseases
So if
that you couldn't treat.
Day, you could live to 70.
Right. It's if you go through most of the rabbis that we know of in the Middle Ages, most of them lived to around 70. Maimonides was a few months short of 70. Rashi was 68. 70, 80. The Rif was in his, I think, late 70s or early 80s. Rabbi Yosef Karo was probably in his 80s. There were others who, the Ari lived to 38, but he died in a plague, and probably there was some type of contagious disease going around. I mean, that's not the, that doesn't describe the biological clock of a person. But anyhow, the flood changed the nature of the world. One interpretation says, why did Noah get drunk? He didn't drink a lot of wine. He drank the amount of wine that he used to drink before the flood, which didn't get him drunk. But after the flood, everything changed. His capacity changed, and he drank the same amount, and therefore he got him drunk. We'll get to the drinking of Noah a little bit later.
One thing you said. I know history has not been kind in its interpretation of Noah, but 120 years in a world which is that corrupt, one man, unspecified when the flood's going to be. How on earth could you possibly undertake the task successfully?
God gave him almost an impossible task. You're right. We shouldn't put Noah down.
Right.
We're just describing a reality that in his generation, the power to change people didn't yet exist, which explains why don't we trace ourselves back to Noah. When we talk about our ancestors, we say our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Why don't we say Noah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Noah was such a righteous person. It doesn't even say the same praises about Abraham as it says about Noah. Because Noah did not have what it takes to be a Jew. What is the definition of a Jew? Many definitions, but in terms of what is the mission of a Jew, our mission is to change the world.
Got it.
If we can't change the world, then we're not Jews. We're good people. There are many good people in the world. But God needed one nation that has the power to infect the next generation and also the people around. Actually, in three ways. In when you talk about knowledge, there's length, breadth, and depth. Length is extending it to the next generation. Breadth is spreading it out to more and more people. And depth is to making it something that's meaningful, not just something superficial. That's what a Jew's obligation is, to spread the knowledge of God in a way that it reaches everyone, breadth, length, to the next generation, and it's something that's not superficial. There's depth to it. Noah didn't have that length, breadth, or depth. Abraham had the length, he passed it on to his children. He had the breadth, he spread it to many people. The depth, that's what Isaac contributed. Isaac was primarily the one who dug wells. He went deep. But anyhow, that's getting a little off the subject. When we go back to the patriarchs, we'll talk more about that. But Noah was not yet in that point, so he's not the first Jew. He's a righteous man, but not the first Jew.
Getting back to 40, that's in 40 weeks, that would be the length of a pregnancy. It's almost like a rebirth at that after the flood.
Right, and also 40 days. It takes 40 days for the fetus to form. That's to determine whether it's male or female. So 40 represents the development of something into something that has potential.
Rabbi,
Yes.
with this purification, and we talk about the changes in people and becoming a Jew, a real Jew, with in the beginning in creation, when God says on the sixth day, when he says, "Be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth," but then he says to Noah, I was reading, he says, "Be fruitful and multiply," and he doesn't say anything more about subduing. And I wondered if this was a reflection that he sees that to give humans the ability to subdue is maybe something not too.
Well, why did he give it to Adam?
Well, he gave it.
Well,
But
why did he not give it to Noah?
Because afterwards he saw Noah was not empathic and righteous.
Okay.
He would not be able to use understanding to subdue.
I think it was with their theme, he gave it to Adam because he had also just put animals on the earth. So the idea was that man would be fruitful and multiply, and man would be elevated compared to the animals.
Right.
I think also it's a lesson for man to learn that some of man's shortcomings.
Now that you brought that up about being fruitful and multiply, Rashi asked the question, why was it repeated? Adam already had that commandment to be fruitful and multiply.
Yeah.
Why did he have to repeat it for Noah? And Rashi answers, for Adam it was a blessing. God blesses him that he will be fruitful. For Noah it was a commandment. For Adam, he didn't have to command him to be fruitful and multiply. But for Noah, there was a need for a commandment. Why? Because now that the world was destroyed, Noah's mission was build a world, settle the world, civilize a world. The notion that some people in the secular world have, that humans are the problem in this world and we are overpopulating this world, is the antithesis of why we're here in this world. Humanity is here, not talking about the Jewish people, humanity is here to populate the world. That's a biblical verse. That the world was not created to be desolate, it was created to be settled. And who had that responsibility? It was Noah who was given that responsibility. Your mission is to populate the world. That's why when he planted a vineyard, something terrible came from that, because God was saying, you're planting the wrong thing now. We don't need vineyards. We need people. Stop hugging trees or vineyards.
And don't save a whale over it.
Right? Nothing wrong with preserving nature, but that's not your mission. Your mission is to populate the world and to cultivate the world and to extract from the world what it can give you, not preserve it, beautiful gardens and lush orchards. It's nice. But that's not your mission. Your mission is to produce as much as you can produce to keep the world going. Jewish people were given an additional responsibility to make the world into a godly world. So the rest of society has to settle the world. So Noach is in this ark for a full year, full solar year, 365 days. And that ark was a model of the future. Because you had all the animals, and they didn't kill each other. They got along, the lion and the lamb. You know, in an Israeli zoo, they had a lion and a lamb. And an onlooker said, how do you do this? He says, we put another lamb in every day. But at the ark, it was the same 7 lambs, or 14 lambs.
It's almost like the world when Mashiach comes.
Yes, that's what it is. It's a model of the future. And the flood is also a model of the future, because the way the future is described is that the world will be filled with the knowledge of God as the sea covers the seabed. That means it will be deluged with beautiful, holy, and godly knowledge.
And when Hashem says, go into the ark is the temple.
Yes, the ark is also, another metaphor for the temple. These are all different metaphors. Okay, after the flood is over, God commands him to go out of the ark. You know, that's a strange thing.
I like it in here.
This is in chapter 8, verse 16. God commands him to leave the ark. Why would you have to command someone to leave the ark?
Because God commanded him to go into the ark, so he can't leave
Without
he can't
God's
leave
okay.
without God giving him
That's
permission.
a very good explanation. But also there's a psychological explanation. I expect a psychological one from you. When you get so used to being secluded from the world, from living in such an insular life, after a whole year, you don't want to go out. There are people who don't want to leave prison. Horrible prison that they're in is their only experience of life that they're used to. And they don't know how they're going to cope outside of prison. And you know what? Noah apparently didn't cope. We find nothing about Noah after the flood, except right after he brings sacrifices and he gets drunk. And how old is he then? He's 601 years old. He lives to the age of 950. So we had another 349 years. And what did he accomplish? How many books did he write? How many people did he change? We read nothing about him after the flood. He was apparently, as some people say, he was a broken man. I mean, to witness the destruction of the whole world, and you didn't contribute to doing anything to save it, can make anyone very depressed. And maybe that's why he drank. Maybe he was depressed. But whatever it is, Noach didn't want to leave the ark. The ark was paradise. Why would I want to go out of the ark into a cruel world, a destroyed world, and try to rebuild it? And God had to tell him,
why would anyone want to go out? If it's like the world of Mashiach in the ark, why
Right.
would anybody want
Perfect,
to go out?
that's right. But Mashiach wasn't yet here. That was just a model of the future, and he had. That's right. He had to be commanded. So there's a spiritual reason. He had paradise, Mashiach, there. There's a psychological reason. He was so dependent on that environment, he couldn't relate to an outside environment, a new environment. And the spiritual and a halachic one, God commanded him to go into the ark. He needed to hear a commandment to go out.
So he had some of the faults of the spies who were in the desert
Yeah.
studying Torah for 40 years.
That's right.
They won't leave.
People who are in paradise don't want to go out. Soul, before it leaves the source of souls to get into this world, it says in Ethics of the Fathers, you live against your will. The soul doesn't want to come down here. No one wants to be here in this world. It's fraught with too many tests, too many pitfalls, and it's much happier in paradise.
So, okay, that brings up another thing to me. Why does the soul agree to come down here, or does God say? I mean, the soul's part of God.
But it's
So
a
is
part of
God
God.
just
agrees.
It has to agree. It has no choice. It doesn't want to come, but God makes it come.
Right. But when God makes the soul, there's only one. There's only one.
One what?
Real. There's only God. God
Yeah,
is
but
the only
but
thing that's
every
real.
soul has its own identity, has its own.
But
A soul is a godly creation. It has an identity and it has a mission.
A soul is not part of a created reality.
No, because it's a godly
Right.
creation.
Right. So it's part of God, isn't it?
Yes, everything is a part of God, but in different ways. So the soul is the most potent form of God's presence, but it also has an individual identity. It has a will. It has intellect. And God says, I want you down here. And the soul, by nature of a soul, the soul, that godly energy wants to go up, wants to be reconnected with its source.
But when you say the soul has an intellect, it doesn't have it separate from God, does it?
That's not separate in the sense that it's not godly, but it's a lower manifestation of God as it comes into this world. The soul goes through a process of attenuation to get it ready for this physical world. And at that point, the soul says, I'd rather stay up there. I'd rather be connected to my source. It's like water from a well. as the water spreads out, it's the same water of the well, but now it's spread out into a different place. Okay, so now he's out of the ark, and he brings sacrifices. This is in chapter 8, verse 20 and 21, and God smells the pleasant fragrance. And God says, I'm no longer going to curse the earth, because the Yetzer, the inclination of the heart of man, is evil from his youth. If you go back to the preceding Parsha, the end of Bereshis, where God is very upset with the world, in chapter 6, verse 5, it says, God saw that the evil of man has multiplied, and the inclination of the thoughts of the heart of man is only evil all day, and God is sorry that he created man. So it uses the same logic. Here it says, why is God destroying the world? Because man is bad. Here it says, why am I not going to destroy the world anymore? Because man is bad. He can't help himself.
But if that's right, I get that. But Jews don't believe in original sin, and it almost, to me, that sounds like we're talking about original sin. So
No, we're talking about what happened to man. Man became evil. Man became so corrupt that his thoughts are to do evil, and that's a reason to destroy the world. And here, God says, you know what? I can't blame man, because that's how he is by nature.
But now we're touching something that's long bothered me. It sounds the nuances, not very deep. God seems to be surprised by me. Continue. God is all knowing.
Sadness.
God is all
Well,
knowing.
these are all metaphors. These are not to be taken that God literally has these emotions. But what we're saying is that God is now changing his thought process. If I tell you, you know what, I'm going to expel you from this class because you're asking too many questions. Mm-hmm. Then you bring me an apple, and I say, I'm going to give you a special prize because you're asking so many questions.
but I'm learning to deal with you.
Yeah, no, it's almost like that's
right.
It's
the same.
And the fact that God,
more tolerant.
And the fact that God has to learn how to deal with his creation, in other words, that his creation surprises him or challenges him, that somehow the creation is putting something in front of him that he didn't know, that he has to adapt to. That has long vexed me in God the All-Knowing, but the literature right in front of us says he's stumped by us.
He's acting as if he's stumped by us. He wants to give us more sense of we have power to change things. We find a similar thing later on. Why does God want to destroy the Jewish people? Because they're a stiff-necked people. And then when God forgives them, he says, they're a stiff-necked people. What do I want from them? If you have...
It's the same type of thing.
If you have a certain...
Except just excluded the Jews. At first, at Noach, he destroyed everybody. He actually did it. Right?
Yeah, he was annoyed with us, right, with mankind.
And then later on...
Right, when Noah brought the sacrifice, that changed God's thought processes. What this tells you is that logic is not absolute. Logic can go, the same argument could lead to two opposite conclusions. People who believe in the absoluteness of logic, the only thing that's absolute is God, not logic. Two people could have opposite views about things, and they're both cogent, both logical.
And the other guy's wrong.
And each side is brilliant, and each side is convinced that he's right and the other one is wrong.
No, logic is based on the physicality of this world, of the cause and effect process. So you have to have, specific axioms. Logic may not hold in God's world because
it holds in this world because
world.
God created logic to have a certain amount of credibility. But ultimately, logic can be manipulated by something that's higher than logic. So here, before the flood, the evil of man, the intrinsic evil of man, is a reason for his destruction. After the flood, when Noach brings this pleasant sacrifice, Noach is eliciting a deeper connection that the world has now with God, and from that vantage point, the logic turns into a benefit for the people. Because they have weaknesses, God says, I understand them. What do I want from them? When you're dealing with the world from the perspective of God's harsh judgment, the worse you are, the more punishment you need. When you're looking at the world from the vantage point of God's compassion, the worse you are, the more compassion. And the more you say, well, what do I expect from them? That's to teach us a lesson also, that if you're looking at the world through limited eyes, you'll see the negative and you'll act accordingly. When you look at the world through the eyes of compassion, which is a deeper part of your personality, you'll see that even the negatives are not as harsh as they seem, and you'll have more compassion for the world.
When we read in Tanya, isn't the Alter Rebbe saying that we're born evil? That the heart is evil? No,
we're not born evil. We're born with an animal soul, which is self-centered, but it's not evil.
It's not evil.
Evil comes from it. Right. Now, going back to the flood, after the flood, aftermath, Noah gets drunk. Why did he drink? Well, one reason could be because... What? No. He was celebrating his survival, his salvation. Another one could be is that he was deeply depressed. So I don't know if this has any truth to it, but this is what I feel. How do you know the difference between a person who drinks because they're happy, a person who drinks because they're sad?
He would drink, he was alone.
Oh.
When they're sad and they drink, they stay sad. When a person is happy, they get
But also, how can you tell externally when a person is happy, they want to share their happiness with others. They bring in others, they throw a party, and they get together and they open up to others. When a person is depressed and they drink, they want to keep to themselves. They withdraw. Apparently, from the story we see that Noah was alone when he drank. Because later on, when he exposes himself, one of his sons sees it and tells the others. Obviously, they didn't know that he drank and that he got drunk. They happened to chance upon him. So it seems that Noah was all alone when he drank. So that's a sign that Noah was really down. He was mourning. In the Talmud it says in the olden days, they used to give a mourner about 12 cups of wine. Until they got too drunk, so they reduced, I think it was maybe 14, they reduced it to 12. I don't remember the exact number. It's in the Talmud. But Noach obviously was not in a happy mood.
Maybe even before that, right? Because he supposedly built the ark by himself for 120 years as a project by himself.
Well, it doesn't say he got drunk, because the ark was built pretty solidly.
And then you
if a drunk was building the ark, you would find a lot of gaps in it.
Is there any indication that his children had problems? I mean, they
Well,
too
one of
lost
them
the
did.
whole world.
One of them had a problem. Ham. What happens? He exposes himself, and Ham sees it. His son Canaan reports it, and his two brothers, Shem and Yafes, walk backwards, and they cover their father. When Noach finds out what the other son did to him, that he embarrassed him, according to the Talmud, and Rashi quotes it, he didn't just look at his father's nakedness. Either he sodomized his father or castrated him. Those are two opinions. Because you don't curse your son for seeing you naked. Noach, a righteous man, is going to curse his own child because he saw him naked? No, he did more than that. And why did he castrate him? according to that opinion, because Ham said, look, Adam had only 2 sons, and he couldn't split the world up amongst them. The world was too small for the 2. My father has 3 sons. Do we want him to have a 4th son? So he actually subverted Noach's new mission to populate the world. And he would have started to do that, but his son, undermined that. But before we get into the curse that he gave, it says in the Torah that the 2 brothers walked backwards and they didn't see their father's nakedness. So the Rebbe asked, that's redundant. If it says that they walked backwards, obviously they didn't see his father's nakedness, because people usually don't have eyes in the back of their head. So why does it have to say they didn't see the nakedness? So the Rebbe answers, when you see someone's degradation, someone's negative behavior, what do you see? Most people see the negativity. When you see negativity, you're looking in a mirror, the Baal Shem Tov says, because you have that negativity, so you see it in others. So then what are you supposed to see? If you see someone drunk and exposed, what are you supposed to think? Oh, this guy is a. You're supposed to think, what can I do to help cover that person? How do I help the person? The compassion, what can I do? What is my role now in doing something to help the person? You don't see negativity, you see challenge. Then it means that you yourself don't have that negative trait in you. That's why it says they went backwards. That physically they didn't see their father's nakedness. But also, in addition, they didn't see their father's nakedness. They saw their responsibility to cover their father. They saw this as an opportunity to do something good for their father, not the negative. Then what happens? Noah curses Ham's son, Canaan, that he should be a slave to his brothers. Why did he curse him to be a slave? There's a law that when a Jew owned a slave, in biblical times slavery was permitted, and I don't want to go into the whole subject of slavery, because the argument against slavery is a very good argument. No person should ever be owned by another person. But the problem is that slavery still exists, not just in Africa or in Saudi Arabia, but in America. We just call it by different names. We know how to sanitize things. We call it compulsory education. We call it prison. We call it conscription in the army. Or even if you enlist in the army, once you enlist, you're a slave. We just find nice names for different things, and we accept that there is a need to have certain types of compulsory service, because children can't be trusted. Even up to the age of 18, you can't trust the child. The father has, and the parents have total jurisdiction. So anyhow, I'm not going to go into why the Torah allowed slavery then, just to say that slavery has always been part of society. And thank God, little by little, we're weaning ourselves off of it, because slavery is not a positive thing. But why did he curse them, this son and his son Canaan, to be slaves? Because what did, and it's an interesting thing, before I answer that, if you owned a slave, how does he go free? If you take out his eye or his tooth. If you affect his mouth, his speech, or his vision.
Really?
Why? Because Ham saw his father and he told it to his brothers. Because he used his eyes in the wrong way and he used his speech in the wrong way. And that's what led him to become a slave. So if you take out his eye and his speech, he goes free. What does all that mean? So I think it means like this. We're all slaves, whether we recognize it or not.
Oh, yeah.
We're all slaves to something.
Mm-hmm.
But the biggest slavery, what is slavery? Slavery is dependence on others. I can't live my life with my own devices, with my own perceptions. I have to see what others are doing. I have to look to see what others are doing. And if I see the others are doing this, then I do it. They had this thing on the internet, people in the doctor's office, and there's like a buzz, and someone gets up. And very soon, every time there's a buzz, everyone is standing up. No one knows why they're doing it. But you see someone else doing it, you have to copy it. Vision is the sign of real slavery. That's the person who's a slave, on a plantation, may be more free than a lot of free people who constantly looking to see what others say, what others are doing. You can't live your own life. You have to live a life vicariously through someone else. And then is speech. You have to tell someone else. You hear some juicy bit of gossip, you're not happy until you tell someone else that gossip. You depend on the other's approval. The others, oh, that's such great news. You're a real important person that you know all this information. That's what slavery is. That's real slavery. That's real psychological slavery, that you have to see what others are doing, and you're influenced by what you see. The eyes are the most powerful organ of the body, in a way. The eyes and the tongue are the most powerful organs of the body. And those are the organs that represent slavery. So when you had a slave and you took out his eye, took out his tooth is also one of the organs of speech, that represented that you got rid of the concept of being a slave. I think we should stop here. There's a lot more to talk about, but we can go. This can take hours and hours.
The rest of it on Shabbos.